In the far reaches of the Orion Spur, on a world where violet skies stretched endless above black stone plains, a child was left behind. Her name was Liara. She was no more than 12 rotations old by her people's reckoning, barely on the cusp of adolescence, yet fate had decided she would taste despair before she tasted freedom. Her species, the Carethai, were wanderers of the stars. They traveled in long caravans of ships, weaving through trade routes, scavenging derelict stations, and eking out survival in the gaps between great empires. To be Carethai was to be rootless, always moving, never home. Liara had grown up among the flicker of recycled lights, the clang of ship hulls patched 100 times. She had never seen oceans, only nutrient vats. She had never felt wind, only the constant sigh of filtration systems. Still, she loved her people, her mother's stories, her brother's laughter, the gentle hum of their caravan fleet that was both cradle and cage. But now, all of that was gone. The world beneath her was called Varus 9, a mining planet abandoned decades before. Its atmosphere was thin but breathable, its surface scarred by extraction pits. Few came here willingly, for the place was infested with creatures the miners had unearthed long ago. Night horrors, the colonists had called them. Beasts that thrived in the caverns, twisted by darkness and hunger. Liara had been brought here not by choice, but by betrayal. Her caravan had entered orbit weeks before, trading in stolen goods with a faction too dangerous to refuse. Arguments broke out among the elders, deals were cut in shadows. And then, without warning, her shuttle was pushed away from the fleet and guided down into Varus 9's poisoned skies. She remembered her mother screaming through the comms, her father's fists pounding against locked doors, her own voice, hoarse with terror. But the elders had made their decision. Liara was expendable, perhaps as payment. Perhaps as a scapegoat for debts her family could not settle. The shuttle crashed on the surface. Liara crawled from the wreckage, lungs burning with dust, eyes blurred with tears. She watched the caravan ships vanish into the sky, their engines, nothing more than fading trails of light. And then, silence. The kind of silence that presses against your skin, heavy and endless. She was alone. At first, she told herself it was temporary. Surely her family would return. Surely her brother would sneak back, defying the elders to rescue her. She counted hours by the rise and fall of Varus 9's twin moons. She waited until her throat cracked from thirst. But the sky remained empty. On the third night, the creatures came. They moved like whispers through the stone gullies, long-limbed, eyeless predators whose bodies shimmered faintly in the starlight. Their jaws were ringed with teeth that never stopped growing, gnashing even. When they rested, Liara hid among the broken hull of her shuttle, pressing herself into shadows, hands clamped over her mouth to smother the sound of her own breath. She had heard stories of these beasts from the caravan elders, tales meant to frighten children into obedience. Now those tales stalked her reality, their talons scraping across the rocks, their sniffing breaths rattling like broken pipes. One lingered near her hiding place, its body trembling as though it could sense her fear. Liara closed her eyes. She thought of her mother's lullabies, the ones sung in the low tones of the Carethai tongue. She imagined her brother's hand squeezing hers, promising everything would be fine. But when she opened her eyes, the shuttle was empty. Only shadows kept her company. The creature moved on. She survived the night. But her childhood had ended. Voice softens, mournful. Each day after became a battle, not for victory, but for endurance. She learned to drink from stagnant pools, cupping foul water in trembling hands. She learned to scavenge roots from the cracks of stone, chewing them slowly to quiet her hunger. And always, always, she listened. The night horrors never ceased. Their howls echoed across the plains, low and guttural, vibrating through her bones. Sometimes she glimpsed them at a distance, silhouettes against the horizon, like shadows pretending to be alive. Other times they came close, too close, forcing her to burrow into ruins or wedge herself between rocks until dawn. Sleep became a luxury. Fear became a constant companion. But worst of all was not the hunger, nor the beasts, nor even the gnawing loneliness. It was the knowledge. The knowledge that her people had abandoned her. That somewhere among the drifting stars, her family still lived, ate, drank, laughed, while she withered in darkness. That the sky she looked upon each night, aching for rescue, was the same sky her family looked upon. But they never looked back. Pause. Voice heavier, darker. Children are not meant to carry the weight of betrayal. They are meant to believe in safety, to trust that someone will come when they cry out. For Liara, trust had shattered. Safety was a word with no meaning. All she had left was survival. And even that, she doubted she could maintain for long. Her body grew thin. Her steps faltered. She began to imagine the monsters not as predators, but as inevitabilities, shadows waiting to finish the task her people had begun. And yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the hunger and fear, a spark endured, a fragile ember of life, refusing to extinguish. She did not yet know it, but that ember was the reason she would endure long enough to witness something extraordinary. Something that would alter not only her fate, but the story of two species. For beyond the horizon, far above the clouds of Varus 9, a different kind of fire was approaching. The fire of human engines. Liara's days blurred into one another. Hunger carved hollows into her cheeks. Her skin, once luminous with the faint silver sheen of her people, grew dull and mottled with dust. Every breath rasped like sand in her chest. The planet seemed determined to grind her into its stone. And still, she wandered. The wreck of her shuttle could no longer protect her. The hull creaked with each windstorm, its panels torn away by scavenging claws. The place reeked of rot from the carcass of a beast that had strayed too close and died tangled in metal. Liara abandoned it, pushing herself toward the jagged ridges that rose like broken teeth across the horizon. It was there, among the canyons, that she learned despair could take shape. The night horrors ruled the gorges. Their nests wound deep into the planet's underbelly, tunnels carved by claws and filled with the stench of decay. Liara heard them long before she saw them, choruses of guttural clicks echoing through stone. She tried to keep to high ground, scrambling over ridges, hugging shadows that the weak sunlight could not reach. But once, in her exhaustion, she slipped. Her foot skidded on loose gravel. She tumbled down a slope, striking stone again and again until she landed in a narrow ravine. Dust filled her lungs. Her ankle throbbed. And then she heard it. A hiss. Low, guttural, close. Her heart slammed in her chest as she pressed against the canyon wall. From the darkness ahead, two pale shapes emerged, elongated skulls, jaws lined with endless teeth. Their bodies moved with a fluid, grotesque grace, claws rasping against stone as they advanced. Liara bit her lip until she tasted blood. She knew she could not outrun them. Not on a twisted ankle. Not in this narrow place. She groped blindly at the ground, and her fingers closed around a shard of stone. Useless against such monsters, but her only weapon. The creatures crept closer, breath steaming in the chill air. Their heads swayed as though tasting her fear. One opened its maw wide and loosed a shriek that split the night. Liara raised the stone, sobbing silently, ready for the end. But then, the monsters froze. Their heads jerked upward, attention dragged elsewhere. A distant thunder rolled across the canyon, low but growing. The shriek cut off. The beasts sniffed the air, bodies tense, then melted back into the shadows. Liara sat, trembling, the shard still clenched in her hands. She could not comprehend why they had fled. But far above, beyond the shroud of clouds, the answer burned across the sky. Tone shifts, low, dramatic. Engines. Bright flares of fire streaked downward, tearing through the atmosphere. To Liara, they were comets, falling stars. But in truth, they were the arrival of humanity. The salvage ship Endeavour had been drawn to Varus Nime by old transmissions, whispers of valuable metals still buried beneath the planet's crust. Its crew were not soldiers, nor rulers, but scavengers, humans, who braved the forgotten corners of space in search of profit. They did not know they were about to find something far more valuable than ore. For Liara, the sight was both terrifying and wondrous. She crawled from the ravine, dragging her aching leg, eyes locked on the streaks of fire cutting the heavens. Her heart pounded with wild hope, though her mind resisted. Her people had abandoned her. Why would anyone else come for her? And yet, the sky told her someone had arrived. She limped toward the light. The journey was agonizing. Each step drove pain through her body. She clung to rocks, hauled herself over ridges, collapsed and forced herself to rise again. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, but the glow on the horizon pulled her onward. When at last she crested a ridge, she saw it. A column of smoke curling upward from a valley, lit orange by the dying engines of a landing craft. Her breath caught. It was real. Figures moved below, small and distant. They wore shapes unlike her people. Broad, angular, heavy suits glinting beneath the sun. Their voices carried faintly through the air, sharp and unfamiliar. Humans. She had heard of them only in fragments, stories traded among her caravan. Primitive, yet dangerous, bold explorers who dared where others would not. Some said they were brutal. Others said they were reckless. None had spoken of them as saviors. Liara's pulse quickened. She wanted to run down the slope, to throw herself at their feet and beg for help. But fear rooted her in place. What if they were like her elders, uncaring, willing to discard lives for convenience? What if they saw her as nothing but a strange creature, unworthy of compassion? What if they killed her? She crouched among the rocks, trembling, watching them move below. Hours passed. The humans worked methodically, unloading equipment, setting up scanning arrays, testing the air with handheld devices. They moved with a kind of confidence Liara had never seen, like predators who feared nothing. But then, something changed. One of the humans pointed toward the cliffs where she hid. Others turned, scanning with visor lights. Liara shrank back, heart hammering. Had they seen her? A beam of light swept across the ridge, blinding her. She stumbled, slipped, and rocks clattered down the slope, echoing like thunder. The voices below grew louder, urgent. Liara froze. The choice was before her now: flee into the shadows of monsters, or reveal herself to strangers. Her legs shook. Tears blurred her vision. Slowly, with hands raised, she stepped into the light. Voiceover softens, suspenseful, for the first time. In her short, fragile life, Liara stood before humans. Their helmets reflected her trembling form. Small, thin, dust-streaked, eyes wide with fear and hope. The humans stared. Their voices hushed. And in that silence, in that fragile moment of discovery, the course of Liara's life and the story of humanity itself shifted forever. Voiceover resumes, low and steady. The humans did not move at first. They only stared. Their helmets reflected Liara like twin suns, Her frail body, her raised hands, her eyes shining with fear, for Liara. Every heartbeat was a hammer against her ribs. She expected a weapon to rise, a command to fire. She had seen how her elders treated outsiders, how easily lives were weighed and discarded. Why should these strangers be any different? But the humans did not raise weapons. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His movements were deliberate, careful. He touched a device on his helmet and his voice carried through a speaker. Low, muffled, strange. Liara flinched. She could not understand the words. The sounds were jagged, harsh compared to the flowing syllables of the Karathai tongue. Still comma. His tone was not threatening. It was curious, almost gentle. Another human knelt, pulling something from a pack. A silver pouch glinted in his gloved hands. He tore it open and poured a stream of water onto the ground, then lifted the pouch toward Liara. Water. Liara's throat ached at the sight. Days without clean drink had left her lips cracked, her tongue heavy. Every instinct screamed at her to seize it, to drink until she collapsed. But she did not move. Not yet. Her people had taught her caution. A gift could hide a trap. A hand extended might conceal a blade. The tall human seemed to understand her hesitation. He set the pouch on a rock, then backed away, palms open. The gesture was universal. I will not harm you. Liara's legs trembled as she inched forward. Her eyes flicked from the humans to the pouch and back again. She reached with shaking hands, lifted it, and brought it to her lips. The first swallow was pain, her throat constricting, her stomach cramping. But then came relief, cool and pure. She drank greedily, tears spilling from her eyes. The humans watched in silence. No laughter, no cruelty. Only quiet recognition of need. When at last she lowered the pouch, her body felt lighter, not safe, not whole, but alive. And for the first time since the shuttle crash, she whispered words into the open air. Thank you. Of course, they could not understand. But the sound of her voice seemed to ripple through them. Heads tilted. A few exchanged glances. The tall one knelt and tapped a device on his wrist. A small projector lit the ground between them, forming shifting symbols, letters, words. He was trying to speak across the gulf. Voiceover softens, reflective. Language is more than sound. It is gesture, expression, intention, and in those first, clumsy exchanges, the bridge between Liara and the humans began to form. She pointed to herself. Liara. They repeated it awkwardly, syllables heavy in their mouths, but the effort mattered. Then the tall one pointed to his chest. Through the speaker came a name, distorted but clear. Jonas. Liara whispered it back. Jonas. In that moment, fear loosened its grip. But trust is not born in an instant. The other humans murmured to one another, their words sharp with debate. Some gestured toward Liara with uncertainty, even suspicion. She saw doubt in their posture, the way their hands lingered near weapons. She knew what they saw. A ragged child of a species they did not know, appearing in a place filled with monsters. An enigma, a risk. Her heart sank. Would they abandon her? Too? Jonas raised a hand, silencing the argument. He looked at Liara, then at his team, and shook his head firmly. His body spoke the decision she could not understand. She comes with us. Relief crashed over her like a wave. She wanted to fall to her knees, to cling to him, to sob until the dust washed from her soul. But she held herself upright. She had been discarded once already. She would not beg. Instead, she nodded. A small trembling nod that said everything she could not. Jonas extended a hand. Not commanding, not dragging, simply offering. Liara stared at it, then slowly placed her small fingers against his gloved palm. His hand closed gently, warm even through the suit. And for the first time since her family vanished into the sky, Liara felt the touch of another being who would not let go. The journey back to their ship was surreal. The humans formed a protective circle around her, their lights sweeping across the rocks, their weapons ready for the horrors of the night. Liara limped in their midst, the water pouch clutched to her chest. Every shadow threatened monsters. Every howl in the distance froze her blood. But the humans did not waver. Their boots struck the ground with confidence, their voices steady. They were not fearless. She could sense the tension in their movements, but they did not yield to fear. That difference was everything. For the Karathai, fear ruled choices. Fear of debt, fear of enemies, fear that had led them to abandon her. For these humans, fear was acknowledged and faced. When they reached the landing craft, Liara stopped short. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Sleek metal panels gleamed under the moons. Lights blinked like stars across its surface. The ramp extended with a hiss of hydraulics, and warmth spilled from within. Real warmth, not the bitter cold of wreckage. Her knees gave way. The sight was too much, too alien, too hopeful. Jonas caught her before she fell. His arm was steady, strong, and for a moment she allowed herself to lean against him, eyes closed, breathing ragged. He spoke softly, words she could not understand, but whose meaning was clear in tone. "You're safe now." Voice lowers, almost whispering. Liara did not know what awaited her inside that ship. She did not know who these humans truly were, or what price might come with their mercy. But as she crossed the threshold, leaving behind the dust and monsters of Varus 9, she felt the ember inside her spark brighter. Perhaps she was not as alone as she had believed. Perhaps salvation had come, not from her people, but from strangers whose hearts beat in unfamiliar rhythms. And in that fragile beginning, in that first step into human light, the story of survival transformed into something far greater. The story of two species, drawn together not by conquest or design, but by the simple, profound act of compassion. Music swells. Narration closes. Part. Thus ended the days of shadows for Liara, and began the dawn of something no world had ever seen before. Voiceover begins, solemn and reflective. The human ship was nothing like the caravans of Liara's people. Where the Karathai vessels groaned with age, patched with scraps, reeking of oil and recycled air, the human craft felt alive. Its walls hummed with steady power. Lights glowed soft and warm, not flickering with uncertainty, but shining with deliberate design. The air smelled clean, carrying the faint trace of oils and strange spices. To Liara, it was like stepping from the tomb into a temple. But temples inspire fear as well as awe. She shrank into herself as the humans removed their helmets. Pale skin, dark skin, hair in shades she had never seen, brown, black, gold. Their eyes fixed on her with unreadable intensity. She felt like prey again, caught in the gaze of predators who had yet to decide her fate. Jonas, the tall one who had held her hand, spoke. His voice was calmer now, without the distortion of the helmet. But she still could not understand the words. They were sharp and quick, tumbling over one another. He gestured toward a chair, a padded seat bolted to the floor. Liara hesitated. On her ships, the elders commanded with gestures like that. "Sit here. Do this. Be silent. But Jonas's face softened. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level, then tapped the chair again. Not an order, but an invitation. Her legs wavered, but exhaustion overcame suspicion. She sat Dot. The others murmured among themselves. Their tones varied, some curious, some cautious, some skeptical. One woman crossed her arms, frowning. Another man leaned forward, studying Liara with scientific fascination. Liara hugged herself, shrinking smaller under their scrutiny. Then Jonas held up a hand. Silence fell. He tapped a panel on the wall, and a soft chime echoed through the cabin. A device unfolded from the ceiling, a lens surrounded by tiny emitters. Liara's eyes widened. Light poured into the room, forming shifting patterns of symbols in the air. Not random shapes, but words. Some were in the harsh script of the humans, others were hers. The flowing glyphs of the Karathai tongue. She gasped. Jonas glanced at her, then pointed to the projected words. His voice came again, slow, deliberate. Jonas, he said, tapping his chest. The projection shimmered. Jonas. Then he pointed to her. Liara hesitated. Then, in a voice that cracked with weariness, she whispered, Liara. The projection shifted. Liara, a bridge had begun. Voiceover softens, thoughtful. Language is the first step of trust. To name oneself is to declare, I am here. I exist. I am not a shadow. For Liara, speaking her name into their world was an act of courage. For the humans, repeating it back was an act of recognition. But words alone could not erase fear. When one of the humans reached to touch her arm, perhaps to inspect her wounds, Liara flinched violently, curling away. Her people had taught her what came after such touches: restraint, punishment, control. Jonas intervened. He raised his hand sharply, halting the gesture. Then he knelt once more, his gaze steady, his movements slow. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, and left it there. No demand. Only patience. Liara's chest heaved. Slowly, trembling, she placed her thin fingers against his palm. Just as she had on the ridge. The warmth steadied her again. And four. The first time aboard the human ship, she allowed herself to believe she might not be a prisoner. They tended to her wounds with care. Cool salves soothed the swelling in her ankle. Gentle hands cleaned the cuts on her arms. A warm blanket, soft, impossibly soft compared to the coarse rags she knew, was draped over her shoulders. The food was strange, packets of dense bars, steaming bowls of broth. The flavors were alien, sharp and salty, but her body devoured them, with desperate need. When she coughed, a human pressed a container into her hands. She drank greedily, warm liquid easing the rawness of her throat. Every kindness chipped away at the shell of despair. And yet, doubt lingered. Why? Question mark. Why would they? Help her, a stranger, a child of another species? What did they want from her? Her people had taught her that nothing came without cost. The elders had abandoned her to save themselves. What price would these humans demand? That night, as the ship rumbled into the sky and left the cursed world, behind, Liara lay awake in a narrow bunk. The blanket cocooned her, the air was clean, and the monsters of the planet could no longer reach her. But her mind churned. She stared at the ceiling, whispering to herself in Karathai, do not trust. Do not hope. They will leave you to. And yet, when exhaustion finally dragged her into sleep, she dreamed not of shadows and teeth, but of human eyes reflecting light, curious, steady, alive. Voice lowers, tense. The next day shattered the illusion. Of safety. The humans gathered in the central chamber, their voices raised in sharp debate. Liara sat curled in a corner, blanket wrapped tight, as their words clashed above her. She could not understand the language, but she understood tone. Fear, suspicion, Anger. Dot. Some pointed at her. Others shook their heads. The woman who had frowned. The night before now jabbed her finger toward Liara with unmistakable hostility. Jonas argued back, his voice rising, his hand slamming against the table. The others responded in kind, their faces taut with tension. Liara's stomach knotted. She knew this rhythm. She had heard it among the elders before they cast her down to Varys. Arguments always ended the same way. Someone was sacrificed. Dot. Her hands clenched the blanket. Tears pricked her eyes. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the walls. Dot. Then silence. Dot. Jonas turned. His eyes met hers. Dot. And he shook his head, slowly, firmly. Dot. Not you. Not this time. Voiceover softens, almost a whisper. Liara did not understand his words, but she understood. His defiance. Dot. For the first time since her people abandoned her, someone had chosen to fight for her, not against her. Dot. And though fear still wrapped her heart, though doubt gnawed like a parasite, a fragile thread of trust began to weave itself into her soul. Dot. It was not yet strong. It was not yet unbreakable. Dot. But it was there. Dot. And it would change everything. Voiceover begins, calm but heavy with emotion. Life aboard the human ship was both a blessing and a torment. Blessing, because Liara no longer woke each morning wondering if her first breath would be her last. No monsters stalked these halls. No hunger gnawed her belly to nothing. Here, light never failed. Here, warmth wrapped her like a constant embrace. Dot. And yet, torment, because safety did not erase memory. Dot. When she closed her eyes, she still saw the shuttle door sealing, her mother's. Screams cut off by metal, the caravan engines vanishing into the black. She heard the scrape of claws, the shrieks of the night horrors circling outside her hiding place. She felt the emptiness of those days when no one came. Dot. And when she opened her eyes, she was among strangers. Strangers who smiled, who fed her, who patched her wounds. But strangers nonetheless. Jonas tried. Every day he sat with her, speaking slowly, pointing to objects, and naming them in his tongue. A cup, a light, a hand. Then he would gesture to her, waiting for her to answer in the flowing syllables of Karathai. Piece by piece. The gap narrowed. Words like fragile bridges spanned the silence. But more than words, it was his patience that reached her. When she flinched at sudden movement, he slowed. When she curled into herself, he gave her space. When she dared to whisper in broken human syllables, he smiled as though she had given him a gift. Still, trust was not simple. 1. Evening, when he placed a bowl of food before her. She hesitated. The steam carried a scent sharp and bitter, unlike anything she knew. Her people had taught her caution. Food could be poisoned, laced with submission drugs, laced with obedience. She stared at it until her stomach ached. Jonas noticed. Without hesitation, he took the bowl, lifted a spoonful, and ate. He chewed, swallowed, then offered it back to her. Her chest tightened. No elder of her people would have done such a thing. To eat another's portion was weakness, indulgence, to prove its safety with your own mouth. Unthinkable. Liara's hands shook as she accepted the bowl. She ate slowly, eyes never leaving him. For the first time, the food did not taste alien. It tasted safe. Voiceover softens, reflective. The others were more distant. Some regarded her with thinly veiled suspicion, keeping their distance as though she carried contagion. Others ignored her entirely, absorbed in their duties. But there were exceptions. The frowning woman, her name Liara learned was Mira, watched with eyes sharp as knives. She rarely spoke to Liara, but when Jonas was absent, Mira's stare pressed heavy, as though she were weighing possibilities. Another crewman, younger, with hair like copper, offered Liara small kindnesses, a repaired strap for her blanket, a tiny carved figure of wood. His name was Callan, and though his words were still foreign, his gestures spoke enough. Liara accepted the gifts with quiet gratitude, but her heart always circled back to Jonas. He was the anchor. The proof that she had not been abandoned again. Yet. Trauma is not erased by kindness. One night, Liara woke to the ship's alarm. Just a test, she later learned, a systems check. But in the shrill wail, she heard the shrieks of the night horrors. She bolted upright, clawing at the walls, her throat tearing with screams. The humans rushed to her. Mira reached first, hands firm on her shoulders, trying to still her. Liara lashed out, sobbing. Certain claws were tearing her apart. Then Jonas was there. He spoke not with force, but with low, steady tones, his voice threading through the panic. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her as she thrashed, until at last her screams broke into shuddering sobs. He stayed with her long. After the alarm ceased, rocking her slowly, murmuring words she barely understood. She only caught fragments. Safe. No harm. Here. It was the first time since her family left that anyone had held her through the storm. And though she wept until exhaustion dragged her back into sleep, something shifted. Not healing. Healing is slower, harder. But a seed was planted. A seed that whispered, "Perhaps not all hands will abandon you." Days passed. Routine grew. She began to explore the ship, timid at first, then with growing curiosity. Panels glowed at her touch, showing streams of symbols and maps. Windows revealed the infinite night of space, studded with stars so sharp they seemed alive. Her. People had crossed the stars all her life, yet she had never truly seen them. The caravan ships had kept her within rusted hulls. Windows sealed, horizons denied. Here. The universe stretched boundless. Once, she lingered too long before a viewing port, her hand pressed to the glass as a gas giant loomed below, its storms, swirling like living paintings. Jonas found her there, and though he said nothing, he stood beside her, his own hand resting near hers on the pane. No words were needed. The silence itself was communion. Voice lowers, heavier, but the crew's doubts did not vanish. During meals, she heard them whisper, glancing her way. Sometimes arguments broke out in hushed tones when they thought she could not hear. Words like liability and unknown carried even through language barriers. Mira was the loudest voice of dissent. Liara felt her disapproval like a shadow. Constant and unyielding. One evening, Mira cornered Jonas outside Liara's quarters. Their voices rose. Liara pressed her ear to the door, straining. She caught only fragments, Jonas's steady tone, Mira's sharp rebuttals. But then came a silence, followed by Jonas's voice, low and fierce as if carved from stone. The door hissed open. Jonas stood there, surprised to see Liara waiting. For a moment he said nothing. Then he simply nodded, a silent reassurance. She did not understand the words of his defense. But she understood that he had defended her. Voiceover softens, closing the section. Liara's days among the humans were filled with contradictions, safety and fear, comfort and suspicion, hope and despair. She was fed, clothed, cared for, yet she lived on the edge of doubt, bracing for the moment when kindness would collapse, when the pattern of betrayal would repeat. Still, through every shadow, Jonas remained. His patience, his steady hand, his refusal to turn away, these became her lifeline. And though she did not yet believe in the future, she began to believe in him. That fragile belief was enough to carry her through the storm of memory and into the dawn of something she had never known: belonging. Voiceover begins, steady but tense. Time softened the edges of terror. Liara no longer startled at every door hiss, no longer clutched her blanket with both fists when footsteps echoed in the hall. The ship, once a cage of unknowns, had become a place with rhythm. The hum of engines, the clatter of boots on metal, the murmur of voices at mess. And yet, rhythm is not the same as harmony. The humans had saved her, yes. They clothed her, fed her, sheltered her. But beneath their kindness, cracks ran deep. She saw it in their eyes when they thought she wasn't watching. Doubt, unease, the suspicion that she was more burden than blessing. And she saw it most clearly in Mira. Mira was not cruel. Cruelty was loud, sharp, meant to wound. Mira's disapproval was quieter, more enduring. A constant pressure, like gravity. When Liara entered a room, Mira's gaze followed. When Liara spoke a word in broken human tongue, Mira's lips pressed thin. When Jonas defended her in crew meetings, Mira's sighs carried louder than the words themselves. For Liara, who had lived her whole life under the weight of silent judgment, Mira's gaze felt like a familiar chain. And chains breed fear. But there were others. Callan, the copper-haired youth, seemed determined to pierce the gloom. He taught her small tricks with tools. How to fasten a strap, how to twist wires into shapes that resembled animals. He spoke to her even when she understood little, his words like birdsong, pleasant without expectation. One evening, he pressed a small device into her palm. When she tapped it, tiny lights shimmered above her hand, swirling into patterns of stars. Her breath caught. She traced the constellations with trembling fingers. "Sky," Callan said, pointing upward. Then he touched his chest. "Callan," she whispered back. "Sky. Callan." For a moment, the distance between species vanished. Voiceover softens, almost hopeful. But hope is fragile. The test came sooner than Liara expected. The ship entered the orbit of another dead world, scarred with ancient ruins. Jonas and two others prepared to descend for salvage. At the last moment, Mira spoke sharply, pointing toward Liara. The words were foreign, but the meaning was clear. "She stays here." Jonas frowned. He replied firmly, shaking his head. Mira's eyes narrowed. Then, to Liara's shock, Jonas gestured to her. "Come." Liara froze. The thought of leaving the relative safety of the ship filled her with dread. She remembered Varys 9 too vividly. The monsters, the dust, the endless fear. To step into another ruin felt like plunging back into the nightmare. And yet, Jonas had chosen her. He was offering her a place at his side, not as cargo, not as burden, but as part of the crew. Her legs trembled as she nodded. The descent was harrowing. The shuttle rattled, the ground below a wasteland of broken towers and blackened stone. Liara's breath came shallow, her body tense. When the hatch opened, the air carried the stench of ash and rust. Shadows stretched across the ruins like claws. Her heart thundered. The world felt too much like Varys 9. Too empty, too haunted. But Jonas placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. His voice was calm, measured. She caught one word she understood. Safe. She clung to it like a lifeline. The ruins were silent, but silence is never empty. As the humans scavenged, Liara wandered a short distance, curiosity pulling her to a crumbling archway. Symbols etched into the stone glimmered faintly. Not human, not Carathai. Something older. Her fingers traced the marks, wondering at their meaning. Then came the sound. A rasp. A low, echoing scrape of claws on stone. Her blood turned to ice dots, spun, eyes wide. From the shadows, a shape emerged, long, twisted, its body armored with plates of bone, eyes burned with pale fire. A monster. Not the same as Varys 9, but kin in horror. Her scream tore through the ruins. Voice sharpens, tense and urgent. The humans reacted instantly. Weapons rose, voices barked orders. Jonas sprinted toward her, placing himself between her and the creature. The beast hissed, claws gouging stone. It lunged. Gunfire erupted, echoing like thunder. Sparks burst from its hide, but it did not fall. It struck at Jonas, who braced, firing point-blank. Liara stumbled back, terror choking her. The sight of claws, of jaws, dragged her mind into old nightmares. She saw herself abandoned again, Jonas torn apart, left alone in the dark. "No!" she cried, though the word was alien on her tongue. The creature reared back for another strike. Something in Liara broke free. She snatched a shard of stone from the ground, the same desperate weapon she had once held against night horrors, and hurled it with all her strength. The shard struck the beast's eye. It howled, staggering. Jonas seized the moment. His weapon flared, a burst of fire and metal that drove the creature crashing into the ruins, lifeless at last. Voice slows, reflective. Silence followed. Only the ringing of echoes remained. Jonas turned to Liara. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Dust streaked his face, but his eyes burned steady. She stood frozen, her hand still outstretched from the throw. Jonas stepped forward, gripped her trembling hand, and whispered a single word. Strong. She did not understand it fully, but she felt it. Felt the weight, the recognition. Not a burden, not prey, not abandoned. Strong. For the first time, Liara saw herself not as a castaway of fate, but as someone who had chosen to fight back. The return to the ship was quiet. Mira's disapproving glares softened, if only slightly. Callan grinned at her with unspoken pride. And Jonas. Jonas looked at her differently now, not just as someone to protect, but as someone who had stood beside him, however briefly, in the storm. That night, when Liara lay beneath her blanket, the memories of monsters still haunted her. But alongside them flickered something new. Not just fear, not just despair. But strength. A strength that, for the first time, she began to believe might one day belong to her. Voiceover fades, closing the section. And so, amid ruins and shadows, Liara discovered that survival was not only about being saved. It was also about standing, trembling, but unbroken, beside those who chose not to leave. Voiceover begins, steady but tense. Time softened the edges of terror. Liara no longer startled at every door hiss, no longer clutched her blanket with both fists when footsteps echoed in the hall. The ship, once a cage of unknowns, had become a place with rhythm. The hum of engines, the clatter of boots on metal, the murmur of voices at mess. And yet, rhythm is not the same as harmony. The humans had saved her, yes. They clothed her, fed her, sheltered her. But beneath their kindness, cracks ran deep. She saw it in their eyes when they thought she wasn't watching. Doubt, unease, the suspicion that she was more burden than blessing. And she saw it most clearly in Mira. Mira was not cruel. Cruelty was loud, sharp, meant to wound. Mira's disapproval was quieter, more enduring. A constant pressure, like gravity. When Liara entered a room, Mira's gaze followed. When Liara spoke a word in broken human tongue, Mira's lips pressed thin. When Jonas defended her in crew meetings, Mira's sighs carried louder than the words themselves. For Liara, who had lived her whole life under the weight of silent judgment. Mira's gaze felt like a familiar chain. And chains breed fear. But there were others. Callan Kama, the copper-haired youth, seemed determined to pierce the gloom. He taught her small tricks with tools, how to fasten a strap, how to twist wires into shapes that resembled animals. He spoke to her even when she understood little, his words like birdsong, pleasant without expectation. One evening, he pressed a small device into her palm. When she tapped it, tiny lights shimmered above her hand, swirling into patterns of stars. Her breath caught. She traced the constellations with trembling fingers. "Sky," Callan said, pointing upward. Then he touched his chest. "Callan," she whispered back. "Sky. Callan." For a moment, the distance between species vanished. Voiceover softens, almost hopeful. But hope is fragile. The test came sooner than Liara expected. The ship entered the orbit of another dead world, scarred with ancient ruins. Jonas and two others prepared to descend for salvage. At the last moment, Mira spoke sharply, pointing toward Liara. The words were foreign, but the meaning was clear. "She stays here." Jonas frowned. He replied firmly, shaking his head. Mira's eyes narrowed. Then, to Liara's shock, Jonas gestured to her. "Come." Liara froze. The thought of leaving the relative safety of the ship filled her with dread. She remembered Varus 9 too vividly. The monsters, the dust, the endless fear. To step into another ruin felt like plunging back into the nightmare. And yet, Jonas had chosen her. He was offering her a place at his side, not as cargo, not as burden, but as part of the crew. Her legs trembled as she nodded. The descent was harrowing. The shuttle rattled, the ground below a wasteland of broken towers and blackened stone. Liara's breath came shallow, her body tense. When the hatch opened, the air carried the stench of ash and rust. Shadows stretched across the ruins like claws. Her heart thundered. The world felt too much like Varus 9. Too empty, too haunted. But Jonas placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. His voice was calm, measured. She caught one word she understood. Safe. She clung to it like a lifeline. The ruins were silent, but silence is never empty. As the humans scavenged, Liara wandered a short distance, curiosity pulling her to a crumbling archway. Symbols etched into the stone glimmered faintly. Not human, not Karathai. Something older. Her fingers traced the marks, wondering at their meaning. Then came the sound. A rasp. A low, echoing scrape of claws on stone. Her blood turned to ice. Spun, eyes wide. From the shadows, a shape emerged, long, twisted, its body armored with plates of bone, eyes burned with pale fire. A monster. Not the same as Varus 9, but kin in horror. Her scream tore through the ruins. Voice sharpens, tense and urgent. The humans reacted instantly. Weapons rose, voices barked orders. Jonas sprinted toward her, placing himself between her and the creature. The beast hissed, claws gouging stone. It lunged. Gunfire erupted, echoing like thunder. Sparks burst from its hide, but it did not fall. It struck at Jonas, who braced, firing point blank. Liara stumbled back, terror choking her. The sight of claws, of jaws, dragged her mind into old nightmares. She saw herself abandoned again, Jonas torn apart, left alone in the dark. "No!" she cried, though the word was alien on her tongue. The creature reared back for another strike. Something in Liara broke free. She snatched a shard of stone from the ground, the same desperate weapon she had once held against night horrors, and hurled it with all her strength. The shard struck the beast's eye. It howled, staggering. Jonas seized the moment. His weapon flared, a burst of fire and metal that drove the creature crashing into the ruins, lifeless at last. Voice slows, reflective. Silence followed. Only the ringing of echoes remained. Jonas turned to Liara. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Dust streaked his face, but his eyes burned steady. She stood frozen, her hand still outstretched from the throw. Jonas stepped forward, gripped her trembling hand, and whispered a single word. Strong. She did not understand it fully, but she felt it. Felt the weight, the recognition. Not a burden, not prey, not abandoned. Strong. For the first time, Liara saw herself not as a castaway of fate, but as someone who had chosen to fight back. The return to the ship was quiet. Mira's disapproving glares softened, if only slightly. Callan grinned at her with unspoken pride. And Jonas. Jonas looked at her differently now. Not just as someone to protect, but as someone who had stood beside him, however briefly, in the storm. That night, when Liara lay beneath her blanket, the memories of monsters still haunted her. But alongside them flickered something new. Not just fear, not just despair. But strength. A strength that, for the first time, she began to believe might one day belong to her. Voiceover fades, closing the section, and so, amid ruins and shadows, Liara discovered that survival was not only about being saved. It was also about standing, trembling but unbroken, beside those who chose not to leave. Voiceover, low and steady. When the Endeavor left the ruins behind, Liara sat by the viewport, staring into the endless dark. The memories of claws and screams still clung to her, but they no longer defined her. She had faced the shadow and lived. Not because she was saved, but because she had chosen to act. The humans had seen it too. No longer only a lost child, no longer merely a mouth to feed. She had proven herself in their eyes. And though fear remained her constant companion, hope now walked beside it. For the first time, Liara allowed herself to imagine that she might belong, not as cargo, not as charity, but as something more. A fragile ember glowed in her heart. And though the universe was vast and merciless, that ember whispered, "You are not alone anymore."